Hi, my name is Matthew Collar, and my PhD project aims to produce a visualization of history across all timescales. I find the best way to explain it is to say it's a bit like Google Earth, except you can also go back in time. In fact, I'm actually using the Google Earth plugin at present, and I've populated it with a whole series of animated data sets that present Australian topics, and they're all in KML format, so they can work in Google Earth. But I personally find the Google Earth timeline a bit clunky to use, so I've built my own timeline, which you can see down here, and it presents a bit of a sort of potted summary of Australia's history on this timeline. So for example, but you can also interact with this timeline in the same way that you interact with Google Earth. So in the same way that you can zoom in and see the virtual globe in greater detail, you can also zoom in on this timeline in exactly the same way. I'm turning the mouse wheel, and we can see that James Cook's voyage took 3 years. And if I zoom in further, we can see the different phases in the voyage. And now we can see him move gradually along, and even see the places that he named along the way. But I'll zoom back out, back to where we started, just about there, about here, and what I'll do is just set this animating and show you the various topics in Australia's history, and maybe give you a bit of so you can see James Cook's other voyages, the third voyage there, and then it takes another few years before we get to the first fleet arriving in 1788, and then the second fleet and the third fleet. And now you'll see George Bash and Matthew Flinders circumnavigating Tasmania. Then Flinders comes back, circumnavigates the whole of Australia. Now, if we zoom in on Sydney, we'll see Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson crossing the Blue Mountains. And now you start to see more and more land explorers spreading out. And this is the extent of pastoral settlement through time. Now, you should now see South Australia has been declared over here. And a few years later, we'll see Victoria declared, and also the gold rush starts up. And about now, you'll start to see explorers heading up, trying to find a way through the centre of, right through north-south, through the middle of Australia. And the reason for this is because 10 years later, the overland telegraph is built. I might stop it now and just take you into a bit more detail, because this is not simply an animation of topics, it's also a great framework for making sense of time. And we can turn on some additional layers. For example, this is a whole set of photographs provided by the State Library of South Australia. It might take a moment to actually load it up. See, there we go. So now we can actually see photos from this period in time. Let's just take a bit of a random sample. Here we go. And Annalby Woolshed in 1877. Some images. The one that I really like is if I start to scan through here, you'll see these black lines being built that represent the railway being built, and you'll see it being built north. As it gets built, when we get up to 1886, it's reached a place called Murray, and there's a photograph right at the end. If I open that up, this is how the outlying stations were supplied by loading up the goods out of the trains onto camels and taking them from there. And this is one of the Afghan camel drivers, one of the first migrant populations in Australia, and there's a particularly large number at Murray. Another place that's really excellent to have a look at, really quite good fun to have a look at, is if we go over to Queensland, and I'll push through time till we can see, here we can see some of the earliest. These are all photographs of aviation in Queensland. These are some of the first images of planes in Australia. And in 1824, we'll see, you can see various places where planes are active. And in 1824, we see the first Qantas air route opening up. And if I open one of these images, we can see the Qantas plane itself sitting on the airfield at Longreach. Okay, and I'll scan a little bit further through time. We'll see if we stop off along the way, maybe we'll see different planes now being used through time. And if we go all the way up to 1937 perhaps. Oops, no, not that one. Here we are, the flying boats that become one of the first big passenger services from Britain to Australia. And you can see that connecting all the way back to Britain over that way. But I've only shown you the European timescale, but that's only a tiny part of Australia's history. And if I zoom right out in time, we can compress the whole 20th century down to a few pixels and zoom out until we see the 50,000 year antiquity of Aboriginal occupation of the continent. Here we are, 50,000 years. I'll go a little bit further. Here we go. And we can now go right back in time and even move over here, and we will see people moving out of Africa, the out of Africa theory, people moving out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, hugging the coast, splitting off in a few different directions. And down here in Australia, you'll see there's actually quite a lot of these symbols here represent megafauna that we know were in these places at this particular point in time. So people can make it all the way after they get to the end of Sunda, which is all of these islands joined together. They have to find some way across to Australia, and after that would have spread pretty fast throughout the whole of Australia. And you can see these red dots represent the archaeological sites known around Australia. You can see those change through time. Another thing you can see is that the megafauna basically die out from around 40,000 years. There we go. And from about 20,000 years is the point where Australia is at its driest and where the sea level is so low that I'll turn off the archaeological dates, maybe, or maybe not. And you'll see sea level rising now, and finally we get through to Australia as we know it today.